today we are discussing the India-Nepal relationship and the friendship that has endured beyond ages. We also see that the Nepalese Prime Minister arrived in New Delhi today and he will be here till the 3rd of April. He will be meeting Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and the External Affairs Minister and the National Security Advisor will also call on the Nepalese Prime Minister. Ambassador Ray, when you see this visit of the Nepalese Prime Minister, which comes at this crucial point, how do you see this in the context of the historic India-Nepal ties?
Well, any visit Prime Minister of Nepal is of great significance. And the fact that this visit is taking place after 3 or 4 years, first. And secondly, it is a visit 8 months after Prime Minister Deuba has taken over. It's a very, very significant visit. And, this is an opportunity to discuss the entire gamut of relations between the two countries and also to establish high-level personal political contact. So in every way, and as you said, particularly in the current global context, I think it's very important that, leaders, especially of neighboring countries, meet regularly.
Ambassador, we also see that visit happens just after the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Nepal. And we've also seen that there has been a recent outreach by China to improve its ties to Nepal, and that also kind of creates a bit of a worry, a bit of a tension for India. Would you agree that this is a point of tension for India, or do you think that our relationship stands on its own and China is not really a factor that we need to worry so much about?
Certainly, I think our relationship stands out on its own, and I don't think no other country can replace India's role in terms of the range, diversity, and depth of relationship. Having said that, there is no doubt that China is increasing its footprint in Nepal, and not only in terms of economic engagement, but also in terms of involvement in domestic political issues. And this is obviously a worrying sign, particularly since the India-China relationship, is at a low. The second factor that we need to be worried about is that, the growing contestation between the United States and China is also playing out in Nepal. I'm referring, to the $500 million grant project that the U.S. was giving to Nepal and which China was opposing. This project has only been recently endorsed by the Nepalese parliament.
Ambassador, we also see that the Nepalese Prime Minister, while in India, will also be visiting Varanasi, and this is also his first bilateral visit here as Prime Minister. Do you also feel that when we look at this visit and we also see that the outreach that India has made to Nepal over the last few years, this would actually fit into the category of saying this is a success of India's neighborhood first policy?
Well, absolutely. And, Varanasi holds a very special place in the hearts and minds of the people of Nepal. There is a very famous, in fact, I'm just coming back from Varanasi today. I lecture at the Banaras Hindu University. Now, the BHU has been home to generations of Nepali students, including 3 former prime ministers. If you go to Kashi, just next to the Vishwanath Dham corridor that has been built, there's a very beautiful Nepali temple at Lalita Ghat that was built by, a Nepali king several centuries ago. Very, very strong connect. And, during Prime Minister Modi's visit to Nepal, we started what is known as the Modi bus between Kathmandu and Kashi. There is also a sister city agreement. So Varanasi actually represents the spiritual, the cultural, the religious connect between the two countries. And, I think it's a very, very warm and positive gesture on the part of Prime Minister Deuba to visit Varanasi.
Ambassador Ray, we've also seen that internally, if we look at the political situation in Nepal, and that has been a matter of concern for a lot of people. There's been this political instability in Nepal. We have seen various prime ministers change. Do you think that is something that is a matter of concern for India, because we share this long border, we also share this great relationship? Do you think this continuing political instability then raises questions?
It is very important for India that Nepal stable and prosperous. Because if it is unstable, Nepal becomes vulnerable to a lot of, external and other influences, which may be detrimental to Nepal's own interests and would also be detrimental to India's interests. So I do believe that, political stability in terms of policies is very, very important in Nepal. And of course, it's a work in progress. it takes time. Nepal has adopted a new constitution only in 2015. So, I guess it'll still take some time. But I agree with you that a stable Nepal is certainly very much in India's interest as well.
Master Ray, we also see that when the COVID crisis was at peak, India did reach out to Nepal and we extended all possible help. But sometimes, when one analyzes the India-Nepal relationship, one also gets a sense that maybe in Nepal there is a feeling of this big brother kind of an attitude which they feel comes from India. One, do you feel that would be accurate? Two, how do you see India then working on removing this perception which has built wrongly over the years?
I think it's very important to remove this perception. And as you rightly said, this perception exists. And there's a reason. Look at the asymmetry in size between Nepal and India. And if you're sitting in Kathmandu and looking southwards or eastwards or westwards, you see India. So India looms very, very large in Nepal's consciousness. And Nepal is a very proud country. It's a sovereign country. So we must treat Nepal exactly in that manner. So I think it's very important that in our behavior, in the conduct of our foreign policy, we are sensitive to this aspect of the relationship.
Ambassador Ray, would you also factor into the cultural linkages that have existed between India and Nepal? We've sometimes referred to this as the roti-beti relationship. How important or how much depth does this lend to the strategic relationship between two nations?
So the great thing about India-Nepal relationship is that it's not a relationship only between the governments. At a fundamental level, it's the relationship between the peoples of the two countries. As you know, there are open borders between our two countries and people can travel without visas, without passports. So this is a fundamental pillar of the relationship. And when we talk about roti-beti, it relates not only to the Tarai plains, it is not only the people of the Nepalese Tarai and Bihar and UP. It extends throughout Nepal. Along the western border, from Kathmandu Valley itself, there are large number of Rana and princely families and other families that have intermarried into Indian families. So it's a relationship of, familial ties and kinship which exists between the people of Nepal as a whole and the people of India. Having said that, we shouldn't overemphasize this aspect. It's an important aspect. Now both countries are changing. You have new generations with new aspirations. And I think our relationship now needs to be rooted really in the economic engagement between the two countries, apart from the cultural and religious.
Ambassador Ray, as you mentioned, that it is the economic aspect of this relationship which should be strengthened. One also hears sometimes the Nepalese side complaining that India's infrastructure projects, which we have launched in Nepal, have also taken a lot of time or they're very slow to progress. Do you think this is a valid critique and how should India focus on removing this one critique which comes up quite often?
Well, there is a point, project implementation is an issue between the two countries. And it's very important that we monitor the implementation of these projects. And that is why we've set up an intergovernmental committee between the two governments, which meets at regular intervals, sort out all issues and problems that arise in project implementation. That's a very important point. Secondly, on the economic relationship, I want to focus especially on hydropower. Nepal has a huge potential to generate electricity from its water resources, and India has a huge demand for electricity. So if we can jointly develop these projects, and I have in mind the Pancheshwar multi-purpose project on the river Mahakali, this is a 5,000 megawatt project. If we can generate this project, both countries will benefit enormously, and it will really cement the relationship and bring the two countries together.
Ambassador Nepal, going forward, as we see the relationship between India and Nepal, and we've also discussed some of the strains that have crept in the relationship over the last few years or decades, what would you define as the three focus areas that India and Nepal should try and work on so that this relationship grows in strength?
My focus really would be on the economic engagement. But if you were to ask a Nepali, and I've been seeing writings of a lot of Nepali commentators, they are talking about the 1950 treaty, they are talking about the report of eminent persons which has not been presented to the two governments. They're also talking about the boundary issues. So, whenever a relationship is so close and intimate, there are bound to be problems in the relationship, and our effort should be to resolve these problems without these problems, being allowed to become like cancerous sores in the relationship. So while these political and other problems need to be resolved, I think the prime focus of both countries should be on the economic engagement.
Master Ray, also, how much of credit would you give to the fact that we've also seen that the India-Nepal relationship has actually strengthened under the Neighborhood First policy? And we've also seen that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has also taken a lot of initiative, a lot of outreach towards Nepal, which was missing before he became PM. Would you say that it is also at the end of the day how much the leader pushes for the interest in the bilateral ties, and that is the core of what we have described as our Neighborhood First policy?
Well, certainly the political leadership determines the direction of the relationship and the intensity. Prime Minister has visited Nepal 4 times. I don't know if there is any other foreign country that he has visited 4 times, and this clearly shows the emphasis and the priority that we attach to the relationship between India and Nepal. So, this is certainly, without political will, without, the very strong commitment of the political leadership, and in both countries. Without this, obviously the relationship will stagnate. There will be no dynamism in the relationship. So this is absolutely critical to, take the relationship to a higher level.
Thank you.